your child is the one that sees you coming with the wipe or whatever it is to clean their face, and they're turning their head already and they're making that uncomfortable face and they're starting to cry, right? If that is your child, please listen to this advice.
Are meal times a serious struggle? Does your child eat a limited number of foods? Does your child eliminate entire food groups? Are you tired of waiting for them to just grow out of it? Welcome to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater, where you'll learn strategies to help your picky eater expand their palate. With Christine Marati-Yoder, a pediatric feeding specialist, speech pathologist, mom of a child with feeding issues, and author of Mealtime Mindset. Let's get started. Here's Christine.
Hi there, and welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Christine, and I'm here to help you make mealtimes less stressful, much easier, and getting in as many nutrients as humanly possible while not driving everyone in your house crazy. So, how do we do that? So today we're going to be continuing on in our July theme of, fun. And I actually am going to do sort of an opposite episode. So, instead of talking about different ways to have fun with food and incorporate fun into the mealtime, I'm actually just going to talk about the opposite, which is what not to do to just make the meal go smooth, because there's nothing that is less fun than a meal just going south. So if there's some ways that I can teach you to avoid that happening, this is going to be the episode for you. So, even without doing any of those, I guess I would say almost like extra things, right? Extra things would be like, making, like we had talked about in other previous episodes very recently, but doing things like playing a game with food, making food into art, just like any sort of like extra activity, even if you did absolutely none of that, if you just avoided doing these 5 things, your meal times would probably just be more fun by default because they would be less stressful and less tearful. So these are my top 5 ways to avoid, um, or I should say, to help you have a fun mealtime without doing any extra work. So that's always fun too, right? Um, so let's dive right in. So my first tip is don't wipe their face at the table. So this is going to be really hard for some parents because I know myself and I know a lot of my friends, and we like things to be tidy and neat, and not everyone is like that, of course, but I know that there is a bunch of moms out there that are just like me who are feeling like whenever there's like a little bit of a mess or there's something dripping, that we want to be the ones to just clean that right up. And that like makes us a good parent. We're taking care of them, we're feeding them, we're making sure they're clean, right? That all kind of goes along into part of our identity as being a good parent to some degree. You might not have even thought of that or realized that before, but that's part of it. It's like, well, if I just like leave them a mess, like what does that say about me as a parent, right? But I'm really going to almost insist that you don't, as much as possible, unless they, of course, if they ask you, like, I need a napkin, I would try what I would do instead, right? Is I would either hand them a napkin and tell them to wipe their own face. You can model it. Or if it's like very bad and it's like preventing the mealtime from moving forward, of course it can be addressed. I would just remove them from the table because I have honestly never met a kid that liked getting their face wiped by, especially, they might like wiping their own face, but especially if someone else does it for them. I'm sure there's a few kids out there. I am not doubting that some kids absolutely love just putting their face up and having mom or dad wipe their face. But I'm going to say that they're few and far between. That's not the average typical child that will enjoy that feeling. Now, If your child is that child who loves that feeling, by all means, completely ignore what I'm saying right now. But if your child is the one that sees you coming with the wipe or whatever it is to clean their face, and they're turning their head already and they're making that uncomfortable face and they're starting to cry, right? If that is your child, please listen to this advice. So, what I'm going to suggest is you just take them out. Don't even bring over, don't even like show them the rag or the towel or whatever. Just take them out, bring them to the sink, and just take some, water from the sink and just do a quick wipe. Just wipe, them there. Um, because even if they don't like it there, their association with the sink is going to be more of the negative than with the chair. And we do not want any negative associations with their mealtime chair, with being at the table. If the last thing you did with them is make them cry in their chair right before they left the table, you could have had a beautiful mealtime. And that was the last thing that happened at that table. It just, even if they come back to the table and you're like, oh, that's definitely not part of the problem, right? They come back to the table every time, no problem. I'm telling you, there's at a subconscious level that every time they leave that table, if they have a bad negative experience, they're not going to be as excited to be at that table, at least at some point down the road. So please stop wiping their face at the table, especially if you are one of the parents that takes the spoon and you scrapes the food off of their face and puts it back in their mouth. That is also a big no-no for feeding therapists. That's something that, we're taught never to really do. So please try to refrain from that. And I'll tell you, it's a lot harder to do than you would think, especially if you've been doing it for a while, especially if you love everything being very neat and clean. That's going to be super challenging for you. But it is going to be an exercise in mental strength for you to refrain from doing that. But it's definitely not going to hurt the child to have food on their face until you take them to the sink. And honestly, the outcomes will probably be much better. So that's my first tip. Do not wipe their face at the table. Okay, number 2, don't have them take the last bite of food. And I've done some posts on this on Instagram, but it is a really important one for even if your kid is not a picky eater. This is a very important thing for every parent and every child to really learn is that it's us in our parent minds that want them to eat the last bite of food because we want that to say they ate all their dinner today. They didn't even leave a bite. The plate was clean, right? How many times have you heard phrases like that, or how many times have you said phrases like that? It's because there's some sort of a joy that we get in knowing that they completed a meal and in its entirety. And I don't exactly know where it comes from. Like everything else, probably goes back to our childhood. But, and of course, not every parent is going to feel that way. But I will tell you, a lot of the parents that we work with do have that desire that we want their plate to be empty, to be clean of food, to be free of food. And it's not important at all if they leave a few bites of food. And I find that this is more pressing when there's really just 1 or 2 bites left because in our minds, right? Well, one, if you're someone who doesn't like to waste food or you have more of like the money mentality of, we don't want to waste that food. That's that costs money. We want to like get our money's worth. Like leaving food would be a waste of money, right? Or something to that extent. Or perhaps it's more of an ethical, like, there's kids that don't have food. You need to finish your plate. That is a very, very outdated and old school mentality. And it was probably very largely based on eras where during the Great Depression, there was like, people really were very, very poor. And, they didn't want to leave food on the plate because, every ounce, every scrap of food was valuable to them. So leaving it was wasteful. So a lot of times I think that gets passed down in generations of, you're being rude, you're being wasteful by not eating everything on the plate. But it's honestly not true. And we don't live in a day and age where we usually are scraping and scrimping for food, right? There's food banks, there is food available. There is enough food for everyone. If you know where to find it, it is there. Um Now, I we don't wanna force them because what it tells their body is that their their feelings, how they feel, if they feel full, if they feel hungry, that feeling is incorrect. That, like, "Oh, mom's telling me that I have to eat more, even though I don't feel like I wanna eat more, even though I don't think I should eat more, I guess I have to eat more." And that could lead to overeating at a later age. A lot of adults have a really, really, really hard time knowing that feeling of when to stop eating, when we're full, when we can say, nope, enough, I'm done. And I think that goes back to that generations of mentality of you better finish your plate. I don't want to see a crumb left on that plate, right? That mentality that kept overriding everyone's feelings of hunger and when to feel full, right? So let's try to undo that for this generation and stop forcing that last few bites. If you are still hungry and you want the last few bites, you take those last few bites and let them leave the table and, acknowledge and congratulate them for listening to their bodies. Like, oh, if that's what your body's telling you to do, then that's what you should do. Um, Now, this is really hard with kids who don't have any hunger cues, because they graze all day, and that's a different problem. But you should definitely listen to my episode on grazing, on the podcast because I go into that in more depth. I'll leave a link to it in the YouTube video. I'll write a note to do that. So I'll leave a link to that. But so that's a different problem for kids that don't even know their hunger cues. They can't even tell when they're feeling hungry because they never get hungry. But a lot of times they will know when they're feeling full. So we do want to allow them to on their own terms tell you, nope, I'm done. I'm not going to eat anymore. And we've had a few kids where there is actually, it seems like they haven't eaten anything, right? And they still have those feelings. I just evaluated a child actually that had this problem, but they weren't having regular bowel movements. Like it takes 2 to 3 days, I believe, to have a bowel movement, and that's just not typical. So that backed up constipation, right? So that if you find that, like, oh yeah, but Christine, they only had like 5 bites of food and they're telling me they're full, like that can't possibly be right. Well, if they're really telling you that they're full and they're not seeming hungry, then there is something else going on. So that should be explored with gut. Why aren't they pooping regularly? Why are they backed up? And that's where you should start exploring gut stuff. And I'll also leave a link to our episode about gut health that we have with where I interviewed Greer McGinnis, where she talked about doing gut testing and finding the cause of constipation and getting kids moving regularly so that they are feeling hungry, that they're not backed up and they're not feeling uncomfortable. Because if you've ever had one of those big over-portioned meals at a restaurant and you just ate so much that you felt so full that you can't imagine, like, you would throw up if you took another bite. If that was you, your kid feeling like that every day because they were so backed up and constipated, that's just uncomfortable. And if we again push them past that point where they're uncomfortable, we're not setting them up for a positive relationship with food at all. So definitely something that needs to be addressed 100%. But definitely don't force those last few bites, especially with those kids. In that case, we need to find out what else is going wrong. Okay, so if you are finding value in this episode, if you can please rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, thank you, thank you for doing that. I'll let you take a second to do that now. It really does mean the world to me, and it really helps people find the channel, find the episodes, so that they can also get these helps and tips that might really be life changing for them. So I do appreciate that. Um, and I'll give you a few more. I do have 3 more tips. So my next one is don't congratulate them. So don't say, "Oh, you did such a good job eating. Oh, you finished all your broccoli. Good job. Oh, you did such a good job with your pancakes today." Right? So that is tying their like their own self-worth to how they're eating food. And we don't want to tie self-worth with food ever, right? Think about we don't want to tie self-worth to body image, right? Like, "Oh, you look so skinny today, sweetheart," right? That's kind of like this along the same lines, right? I know the idea is that we want to praise them for eating because in our mind, when they eat, it's doing something that makes us happy, right? So sometimes, not every kid, but some kids who are want their parents to be happy, or they think that they might get something for doing that, they might be very uncomfortable, but push themselves to do something that their body isn't really ready to do, that they're uncomfortable eating or doing for various reasons in order to gain that praise from you. And if the only time they're gaining that praise is with food, especially, they're going to really start tying their self worth to food. And as the only way to get your attention, as the only way to make you happy. And we really just don't, we just want to avoid that entirely. But what you can do is, and I will link to this too. I just created 50 things, positive things you can say to your kids at mealtime that don't involve like, "Good job taking a bite," or "Good job finishing your meal." It's other positive things you can say, like, "You did a great job setting up the table today," right? So we want to kind of tie it to more like their behaviors around the meal, like, "You did a great job sitting at the table. I love how you're passing food around. Thank you so much for helping to serve the food. I appreciate how you helped cook the food." So I have over 50 different things you can say, so you'll never run out of something positive to say that replaces those negative tying food worth to your child's mental state. So hopefully that will really help you. It's a free download, so definitely check it out. I will link that down below as well. And tip number 4 is using food as a reward or punishment. So this would be things like, "Well, if you don't eat your broccoli, then I'm going to be taking away your computer." Or "If you eat your beans, you'll get ice cream later, or you'll get I don't know, a new stuffed animal from the store. Mommy will go to the store and buy you a new animal," right? So we want to avoid that at all costs as well. Probably, you can probably assume for the same reasons why I talked about in the other points I made earlier today. But that sets kids up for, again, doing something that for an external reason, not because they're enjoying eating food with you, not because they're enjoying eating or trying that food, or they're hungry and they want to eat that food. They're doing it for something outside of themselves, which is an external like reason. So we want to build internal um motivation. That is an external motivation. So if someone says, so an external motivation again would be um, something like you going to work to get money. You're going there for an external reason to acquire money, right? But for your kids, you wouldn't necessarily do something for your kids because you were getting paid for it, you would do it for them because you just truly from your heart love them and want the best for them, right? We want kids to have that internal love and motivation towards food. And it's just you can't build that from the external. You can't be like, well, if I just, train the heck out of them that every meal I get them a toy, at some point they're going to absolutely love mealtime. No. They're not, because the second you start pulling that away, the behavior is going to drop off. It's just conditioning. It's just like a basic psychology principle of conditioning. Um, and it doesn't build that internal love. They might start to associate and look forward to meal times not because they're excited internally for that moment to be there with you eating, because they love that food or whatever it is. It's always going to be for something outside of themselves. So when we do feeding therapy, we are building internal motivation. Now, does internal motivation building take a lot longer than external? Yes. You're obviously going to see faster results with that behavior modification of rewarding behavior, but it's not as long lasting, right? So we're building a lifelong love of food, and that does not happen overnight quickly with those quick. You're basically like, putting like a band-aid on a wound, a gaping wound. We want to heal the wound so that there is no need for a band-aid ever, right? We're kind of like we're taking the long way, but the right way, if that makes sense. Okay? And before I give my last tip, I just want to thank you again for watching today's and listening to today's episode. If you need more support, more one-to-one, we have so many resources. We are just about to launch our new website with a whole big page of resources. We have audio subliminal downloads, freebie downloads, free parent webinars, courses, one-to-one support, my book, Mealtime Mindset. So there's tips and tricks on YouTube and Instagram. And there's just so many ways to get help. And, I'm really happy now that I offer so many and at all different price points. Right. I just launched my 7 plating strategies course, which is right now it's only $30. Right. So there's something at every price point for people to get help in this area. So I'm really proud that I've been able to put that out there, because for a very long time it was just private therapy, which is of course the most expensive because it's that one-to-one attention. But I'm really so proud that I've been able to create content and things that are accessible to everyone at every price point, from free to VIP. So if you need more support, please visit our website, foodologyfeeding.com, so that you can get whatever support you need to help you feel success at your meal times. So I'll dive into our last one. Now, this is along those same lines that we've been talking about, but you want to avoid force feeding. So this is actually, I feel like there's different levels, right? So at first, congratulating them might not seem like a big deal. It's just saying good job doing that thing, right? Then it gets a little bit more intense, where you're going to use food as a reward or punishment. And we said don't do that either, right? So you can imagine force feeding is also not a great idea. So this would be like literally sneaking food into their mouth in some way. So I've seen this a lot, especially in infants, but this is a little bit different, especially with the infants. But this concept's a little bit different from the previous 2 I just mentioned, because your child might be expecting something and then you sneak in something else. So you might have even seen this. I've seen a few people post reels about it, I think. But basically, they might hold like their favorite puree on a spoon. Like, let's just say your child only eats like a soft puree. And then on the other hand, sneakily on the side, you have like a cracker. and your child opens their mouth thinking they're going to be getting that puree, and then you swoop in with a cracker. Whoops, tricked ya. Okay, so you can imagine that I would probably not support that, right? But the reason why is, well, for a few things. We our brain, right, visually, if you are expecting something and you get something different, you're not going to start to trust your eyes as being an accurate conveyor of information anymore, right? Because think about it. If you, let's just say, in a magical world here, let's just say you go out to a restaurant and you order a steak, but when you put the steak in your mouth, all of a sudden, it tastes like applesauce and it's soft and mushy. Like, what would you think? Like, oh my God, I looked and it looked like steak, but it sure does not taste like that. It doesn't feel like that. What that would like totally rock your world, right? Think about it. Like, you would be like so confused. First of all, like, what just happened? I thought I saw something that I knew you had a rule, a construct around, like what it was supposed to look, smell, taste, feel like. And then all of a sudden, that was all evaporated in one moment because you swooped in and you changed it at the last second. And it will freak kids out if you do that. Because think about it, it would freak you out, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that freak you out? So that totally breaks trust. That is a great way to end the meal, hate you feeding them, hate that food, whatever it is. They're gonna they're just going to build up like walls really quickly, because when you can't trust something, when you can't trust that the rules that you've created in your mind around that object are true, then you just have it just evaporates that trust. So you have to like go then that's when we have to go backwards and like reestablish trust all over again. And to some degree with every picky eater, you're going to have to reestablish that trust. But I think it's even harder because when you break those rules, right? Everyone has a rule. In your head, this is a pen, right? That pen has certain properties that you know and you expect every single time you see a pen, you know that it's going to be somewhat hard. You know that something's going to come out of it. If you had a pen and all of a sudden it just turned to jelly, you would be very, very upset and confused because it broke every rule in your brain about what a pen meant to you. So you would possibly not want to pick up pens anymore. And that's what happens to kids when you trick them with food that they expect to be one way and it's some plate and it's totally different. Now you might think, okay, well, what if I just like replace it with like something that's very, very similar? So it's not so different. Um, and I would say, well, there's no reason to do this switch then. I would say if you're going to replace it with something that's different, just put that different thing in the plate in the bowl so they can see it and experience it and understand that it's going to be different before it reaches their mouth, right? So that's why having them do things like meal prep is really good, because if they help create the meal, they know what's in it. They know what has been done to it, right? So they can be a little bit more mentally prepared to handle it. Um, and I especially say these things really for the very young babies that don't even understand like what's happening totally. But this can also go for the older kids too, because it is easy to like sneak things in. And I do talk about adding in nutrients and adding in things like, vegetables into the sauces and different spices and things like that. But I don't like to do it in a way that like they don't really know that it's in there. I like them to be a part of the making it so that they see that there is something different in there. Um, Now, very, very small changes that aren't very noticeable, probably you can get away with. But if you had like a very soft, I don't know, like let's just say like you had a puree, but then you added like a hard piece of chicken or steak in that puree, and they had never had that before, or they just weren't expecting it because you covered it up and you just kind of snuck it under there just to get it in their mouth, you probably are taking them back a few steps, because if they have a negative experience, right? So the only way you're going to get away with it is if they happen to have a positive experience with that and they continue to have positive experiences. If they have a negative experience when you put that in their mouth, they're never going to trust that safe food that you covered it up with again, right? And some kids, it could take one time to mess that up. So you don't want to do that if you can avoid it. But that is my last tip. I really hope that this was so helpful. And let me know in the comments. I can't wait to hear how your meal times are going. All right. Thanks so much. And we will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.